7 miles. That's the distance between 56 million gallons of radioactive waste and one of the most important rivers in North America. The waste is sitting in 177 underground tanks in the Washington desert. Most of those tanks are older than your grandparents. At least 67 have leaked, and the groundwater below them flows east toward the Columbia. This is the Hanford nuclear site, and what's happening there right now is the biggest environmental story in the country. Let me catch you up on where things actually stand. As of this spring, 3 underground tanks at Hanford are leaking radioactive waste into the soil. Washington State has them named and tracked. Tank T-111, Tank B-109, Tank T-101. The one worrying officials the most is T-101. It was only called a leaker in August 2024. The reaction from state officials was sharp and fast, deeply worrying, needing quick action. The current leak rates sound almost small. About 1.5 gallons a day from Tank B-109, less than a gallon a day from T-111. But those numbers only cover the 3 tanks leaking today. They don't cover what's already in the ground. More than 1 million gallons of tank waste has already leaked into the soil across the Hanford site. 65 square miles of groundwater beneath the site is polluted above safe drinking water limits. And parts of that pollution have already reached the Columbia River. The reality on the ground is this. Polluted groundwater is flowing freely into the Columbia. Not someday, not maybe. Freely, now. And the tank leaks are only part of the story. During the decades when Hanford was making plutonium, the federal government dumped roughly 440 billion gallons of polluted liquid straight into the ground. Through trenches, through injection wells, through cribs. It was the cheapest disposal method available, and nobody was thinking about what would happen 80 years later. That older pollution is what's moving through the aquifer toward the river right now. The current tank leaks are adding to a flow that's been building since the 1940s. Here's what's actually in the river. 6 confirmed poisons from Hanford have shown up in the Columbia: hexavalent chromium, nitrate, uranium, technetium-99, tritium, strontium-90. Each one of them is being measured in groundwater that feeds the Columbia from under Hanford. The city of Richland sits 7 miles downstream of the site. Its drinking water reading is well below federal limits. The Columbia is huge. It waters down almost everything. But watering it down doesn't help the young salmon. Spawning in the riverbed gravels along the Hanford Reach, hexavalent chromium in some riverbank seeps is still above the fish safety standard of 10 micrograms per liter. The fish standard, not the drinking water standard. The drinking water standard is almost 5 times higher. What's safe for people to drink can still be toxic to the fish that built this river's ecosystem for thousands of years. This is the core geography problem. Hanford sits in the middle of a 586 square mile site in the southeastern Washington desert. The Columbia River forms roughly 50 miles of its northern and eastern edge. The tanks sit on the central plateau, about 7 miles from the river, 200 feet above the water table. Groundwater moves from west to east toward the Columbia. The reason the site exists there at all is the reason it's such a problem today. In 1943, the federal government chose Hanford for plutonium making because of the Columbia River, the cheap power from Grand Coulee Dam, and the empty desert. That plutonium went into the Trinity test, and the bomb dropped on Nagasaki. The waste from making it is what's in the 177 tanks today. The spot that was perfect for wartime work is now almost the worst possible spot for long-term storage. Downstream of Hanford, the Columbia runs past the Tri-Cities, 300,000 people. Then another 200 miles to Portland, then to the Pacific. The pollution is a Hanford story today. It's a Pacific Northwest story tomorrow. The 177 tanks at Hanford break into 2 types, and they're both failing in different ways. 149 single-shell tanks sit in the 200 East and 200 West areas. Steel lined with concrete, buried under 7 feet of soil. They were built to last 20 to 25 years. The oldest ones, the Manhattan Project tanks, are 82 years old this year. The newest single-shell tanks are 62. Every single one of them is decades past their built-to-last date. At least 67 have leaked. That's roughly 1 in 3. And the single-shell tanks aren't even the only problem. 28 double-shell tanks are supposed to be the backup. A second steel shell wraps the first, catching anything that escapes from the inner tank. Most of them are between 40 and 57 years old. And in 2012, the first one failed. Tank AY102 was Hanford's oldest double-shell tank. Workers found radioactive waste building up in the gap between the inner and outer shells. The inner tank had failed. That discovery broke something bigger than the tank itself. For decades, the double-shell tanks had been the answer to the single-shell problem. Build a second layer. Catch the leak before it hits the soil. A Y102 proved that even the backup could fail after enough time. Emptying it took until 2017. The second shell held, which is the only reason that failure didn't become a soil pollution event. But it broke the belief that the double-shell tanks would last forever. Inside all 177 tanks, about 1,500 different chemicals are mixed together. Highly radioactive sludge, salt cake, liquid on top. The chemistry is a nightmare, because 4 decades of Cold War work poured one waste stream on top of the next, never planning to pull any of it apart again. Every tank has its own recipe. Some are thick like peanut butter, some have hardened into concrete, some still shift and slosh. Every cleanup plan has to account for that mix, and none of it was documented in the rush of wartime production. Workers have so far emptied 24 of the 149 single-shell tanks, pumping the contents into the double-shell tanks for short-term storage. Tank A106 emptying began in February 2026, the 24th so far. At the current pace, fully emptying the single-shell tanks runs well into the 2050s. And then the emptied waste still has to be treated, which is where October 2025 changed the story. On October 15th, 2025, the waste treatment and immobilization plant started turning Hanford tank waste into glass for the first time. This was the biggest cleanup step in American nuclear history. The first waste went through the melters on October 11th. By early December, 20 stainless steel cans of glassed waste were done. In April 2026, the first cans were lowered into a special landfill on the Hanford site, the Integrated Disposal Facility. The process works. Tank waste gets filtered to pull out cesium-137 and other high-energy parts. The leftover low-activity liquid is piped to the glass plant. It's mixed with glass-making materials and heated to 2,100 degrees Fahrenheit. That's hot enough to melt steel. The mixture turns into a glowing orange liquid that flows like honey. The melted glass gets poured into cans, where it cools into solid blocks that hold up for tens of thousands of years. Water can't break it down. Chemicals can't break it down. Once the waste is locked in glass, it stays locked in glass. It also took 23 years to get here and cost roughly $30 billion. The original 2000 deal put the plant at $4.3 billion. First finish date, 2011. The plant is about 14 years late and 7 times over budget. And this is the part that matters for what comes next. The plant that came online in October only handles low-activity waste. The really dangerous stuff, the high-level waste holding most of the radioactivity, needs a fully separate building. That building is still being built. It's not expected to start working until 2033, 7 more years before the worst of it gets touched. Meanwhile, the tanks keep aging, which brings us to the fight happening right now. The federal government is pushing another option besides glass, called grouting. Instead of turning waste into glass, you mix it with a cement-like material. It's faster. It's cheaper. It's also much less lasting. And Hanford's specific tank waste mix has never been fully tested for long-term grouting safety. The difference between glass and grout comes down to how long it holds up. Glass blocks stay stable for tens of thousands of years. Grout blocks, depending on what's in them and what's around them, can crack, crumble, or leach over much shorter time frames. For waste that stays dangerous for hundreds of thousands of years, those extra centuries of safety matter. Washington State has a test for any option other than glass. The state calls it the as good as glass standard. Cement doesn't meet it. That's been the state's stand for decades, and it's the line drawn in every legal deal on the table today. The federal side is that grouting saves money and time. A March 2026 study said better grouting at Hanford could save up to $210 billion. The timeline of the fight, pulled straight from this year's paperwork, goes like this. January 10th, 2025. The federal government, the Environmental Protection Agency, and Washington State finalize the Holistic Settlement Agreement. It approves grouting of low-activity waste from 22 tanks in the 200 West area, first planned at 15 million gallons. Newer counts put the real amount at 32 to 39 million gallons. The grouted waste has to leave Washington, shipped to dumping sites in Clive, Utah, and Andrews, Texas. December 10th, 2025. The main Hanford cleanup company puts out a $4 billion request for bids for grouting and dumping. Size, 24 million gallons, can grow to 50 million. Bids are due February 23rd, 2026. January 7th, 2026. The deadline for picking where grouting happens, on-site or off-site, gets pushed from December 2025 to July 1st, 2026. February 11th, 2026. The federal government sends a formal permit change request to Washington state. It would let the leftovers from glassmaking, the side waste made during the glass process, be grouted instead of glassed. Every gallon of tank waste turned into glass makes another 1 to 3 gallons of side waste. If that side waste gets grouted, the glass plant can handle up to 20% more tank waste overall. The public comment window on that permit change runs through early June 2026. The state decision is expected by the end of May. Washington's stand is that grouting breaks the as good as glass standard the state has held for 30 years. Watchdog groups oppose it, river groups oppose it. The Yakama Nation, the Confederated Tribes of the Umatilla Indian Reservation, and the Nez Perce Tribe have all publicly said they were left out of the holistic agreement talks, and they oppose more grouting. Oregon is fighting it from the downstream side. In December 2025, Oregon's governor and senators filed formal pushback over the idea of 30 million gallons of liquid radioactive waste being hauled by truck and train through the Columbia River Gorge on Interstate 84. That's not a small number. 30 million gallons is enough to fill roughly 45 Olympic swimming pools. And every one of those loads would move along a highway that runs right next to the Columbia River for most of its path through Oregon. If a single tanker rolls, the material it's carrying ends up in the same river the whole cleanup is supposed to protect. Oregon's point is simple. The waste should be turned into a stable solid before it's moved, not kept liquid and rolled through their state. This is the decision that gets made this summer. The October glass milestone almost didn't happen at all. In early September 2025, the Federal Energy Secretary told Washington's top lawmakers by phone that he was planning to stall the startup of the waste treatment plant. The same plant that began glassing waste 5 weeks later. Those lawmakers went public with the call within 48 hours. The governor called the plan a huge waste of money, a break of multiple legal deals, and a slap in the face to the workers who had brought the project to the edge of running. Both of Washington's senators spoke out. The state's top lawyer threatened to sue. The Republican representative, whose district holds Hanford, spoke out against any stall. Within days, the federal government turned around. The October 15th deadline held. The deeper political fight is still live. The current government's policy plan clearly calls for using cement and grout to treat all low-level waste, including at Hanford. The fiscal year 2027 budget plan includes a 5% cut to environmental cleanup, roughly $386 million. Most of that cut falls on Hanford. That kind of cut doesn't just slow down the glass plant, it slows down tank emptying, groundwater pumping, and the workforce that keeps all of it running. About 10,000 people work at Hanford right now. Cuts at that scale mean fewer hands on a site where aging tanks don't wait for budget decisions. Every month of slower work is another month the tanks keep aging, and the groundwater keeps moving. The October milestone is real. Whether the full cleanup keeps going at that pace is an open question. The total cost to finish cleaning up Hanford, based on the newest long-term cost report, now runs between $364 billion and $589 billion. More than $58 billion has already been spent. Yearly spending is about $2.5 billion. Active cleanup is planned through 2086. Long-term care runs past 2100. The federal government is now set to spend more cleaning up Hanford than it spent building every reactor and every plant on the site during the whole Cold War. And the tanks are still leaking. The groundwater is still polluted. The Columbia River is still 7 miles away. 3 tanks are leaking today. 67 tanks have leaked over the years. Each one that leaks adds more stuff to the groundwater that flows toward the river. The fix for the leakers is emptying them, and emptying has taken 24 tanks down from 149 in 2 decades of work. The high-level waste glass plant doesn't come online until 2033. The grouting decision gets made this summer. This is not a story that wraps up in the next news cycle. What it is a story where every choice made between now and 2086 decides how much of what's under Hanford ends up in the Columbia River. The glass is real. The leaks are real. Both things are true at the same time. If you want to stay on top of stories like this, subscribe. I cover Earth news, geography, and the physical systems that shape how we live. New stories like this one every week. The next question for Hanford isn't technical, it's political. Does the federal government stay with glass as the main fix, or does grout become the default because it's cheaper? The answer shows up in the permits filed this summer, the contracts given out this fall, and the budget Congress passes for fiscal year 2027. If glass wins, the Columbia River gets the long version of protection. Stable blocks that last longer than any nation that's ever existed. If grout wins, the waste gets treated faster, cheaper, and with a shorter safety window than the radioactivity it's holding. Those aren't the same outcome. The tanks don't care which version gets picked. They keep aging either way. The groundwater keeps moving either way. The only thing the choice changes is how far the pollution travels and how long the damage lasts before someone else has to deal with it. Every year of delay adds more material to the soil. Every summer, the snowpack feeds the Columbia higher, pushing the aquifer harder toward the river. And the answer shows up, eventually, in the Columbia River.